So, yay, I actually got it done. Okay. All right. Well, I can't see all of you all now because I got my presentation up on the screen. So, Mark, if you see somebody jump something in the chat, or Michael, if you see somebody drop something in the chat, just pause me. Or like I said, feel free to use the hand raise tool as we go. So it's a pleasure to have everybody today. And my name is Kevin Corwin. I know several of you guys. Kevin Corwin, co-founder of the program and project management software system called InScope. You see here before you, and that's our website up in the corner. If you want to visit InScope, we do have a free trial available. If you just want to get in and try it out, and we're gonna, of course, we want to tell you about InScope and tell you a little bit about how it helps you manage these the four realities of consulting, as we call it. But we also hope to show you some general tips and tricks, that you can hopefully apply to your business kind of no matter what system you're using, and give you some thoughts about what to look for in systems as well. And this is actually the first of this is a 4 series webinar, and we're going to cover each one of these realities in one webinar, about 3 weeks apart. And I'm sure you'll probably see other emails and announcements for our other ones if you want to sign up for those. Just little half-hour webinars, kind of help you, give you some general glean into InScope, and of course, information, just about, like I said, general tools and tricks. So our goal is to help make consulting firms as successful as possible. And the one thing about project management tools that we think, especially in the consulting world, is the juice has to be worth the squeeze. So if the tools are too difficult or time consuming, meaning, and that's where this equation comes from, if the information effort is real high, then that information effort outweighs the prediction value. Because really, when your project management tools, you have them, you want them because you want to tell the future. You want to be able to forecast and predict what is going to happen and what's the trajectory of my projects. And so if the effort in a project management system is too large, then that begins to outweigh the prediction value of it. And so, people don't use it, and then you don't get the value of the prediction. So that's sort of our theory. And that was one of the main reasons, that we developed InScope. Both Mark and I have engineering backgrounds, as most of you know. We also have business backgrounds. And so we really felt like, man, there needs to be a tool where that information effort is really, really low so that your prediction value can be really high. And so that's what we've tried to do with InScope, is build a system that enables project-driven businesses, as we call them project-driven businesses, gives them efficiency. And that's one of the big things we're going to talk about today, is in terms of utilizing your talent, because this is the project-driven business cycle. I mean, you guys know this, you live this every day, where you plan the work, you do the work, you control the work, and you try to win more work. And so that is what InScope is designed to do. And really what we want to tell you about in today's webinar is in terms of maximizing talent. So to maximize your talent, you think about, your talent, your people. That is the biggest investment that you are going to make as a firm, right? I mean, you think about not just their salaries, but of course, professional development that we talked about earlier, benefits, everything, training, coaching, the time investment that you make, everything you do, and your firm's success relies in a great deal upon your talent, right? So our learning objectives today, we want to talk about, well, what are sources of inefficiency for talent, and what impact does that have on your talent pool? And then we want to give you some ideas ways to reclaim talent productivity, so how to shift from what talent is currently doing to the things that they really want to do, and you want them to do, and then tools to optimize that talent allocation. Fundamentally, you think about minimizing that information effort side of this equation, fundamentally, this is all you really need to solve for project management. And this is what we call the iron triangle in project management. Most of you guys have probably seen this triangle before, right? You have a scope of work you have to do for a project. You have resources and costs that have to be incurred in order to accomplish that scope of work. And that scope of work is going to take a certain amount of time, right? Well, the relationship between scope and cost, that's of course where you're estimating hours, and it's going to take, Paul this long on this task and Ryan this long on this task, sort of thing, right? So that's the relationship there. And then of course the classic Gantt chart is the relationship between your scope and your time. Well, if you have those two things, then you have the other side of the equation, which is, well, how much is this project going to cost over time? And or for the business side, well, what are the fees that I am going to make over time, right? So if you can solve that triangle and make that triangle really efficient to solve, then your talent and where your talent spends time should look more like the graph on the right versus the graph on the left, because what you don't want is the graph on the left where your talent, and that's where a lot of inefficiency comes from, is because they're looking for info, tracking statuses, reporting progress, coordinating tasks. You want to try to minimize that. All those things are important because they provide the prediction value, but you want to try to minimize it to make it look more like the graph on the right so that they can do other things like satisfying clients and pursuing opportunities, right? So when the iron triangle is laborious to maintain and leverage, too much of your talent's time is spent on these activities. Okay, so to do this, what we typically do, and you all probably have a spreadsheet like this. As a former city engineer, I've reviewed thousands of these spreadsheets, and this is fundamentally the scope resource or scope cost relationship, right? I organize the scope of work, I break it down, I use a work breakdown structure vertically, and then I have my resources listed across the top and columns across the top to where I can allocate the amount of effort I expect those resources to expend. And that's fundamentally how I develop, my fee when I'm proposing to a client. I mean, this is the classic breakdown that we use. And we use a fee spreadsheet, like this, where we get the cost derived from the resources and the time they're going to expend. Same thing for the project schedule, right? So the project schedule, and we put together project schedule, hopefully to refine our efforts, because as we think about, well, how long will something really take? Well, that can, of course, inform not just our workload, but it can inform, okay, well, maybe I don't have enough time in this particular task, or, maybe we need to think about doing this as well in order to meet the client's needs, or how many meetings will there be, right? So we use the same sort of structure even when we're scheduling, right? We break the scope of work down vertically, and the scheduling data is then organized horizontally where we're putting in starts and finishes. Well, when we have those two things, if we have just those two things together, you got two sides of the triangle, right? I mean, if I have my schedule, then I have my relationship between scope and schedule. If I have my scope and cost, if I have my fee breakdown spreadsheet, then I'm at forecasting how long something's going to take or how many hours it's going to expend, then I have the other side of the triangle. Well, getting the third side, that's where the challenge can come in. And so what we want is the ability to easily merge these things. I mean, that's fundamentally what we're after, because again, in order to minimize in terms of project management effort, in order to minimize the information effort, I just want to solve this triangle all the time. I mean, that's really what I'm fundamentally trying to do. So
I'm
when we
real
try,
quick jump in
oh
on
yeah,
that
yeah,
last
please
slide. I
jump
just
in.
wanted to mention that last piece, though. I mean, a lot of everybody's got the Gantt chart and the Excel spreadsheet, but that last piece where we start to put schedule and resources together. So now we've got schedules and we've got the man-hour allocations all put together. That's a very, very powerful piece of the triangle, that foundation. There's where all your predictive value comes in. That's where workload comes out of. That's where cash flow projection comes out of. It's all that schedule resource cost. So just between a Gantt chart and a fee estimate spreadsheet, you really don't have it yet. I just wanted to throw that in.
No, yeah, Mark, definitely. As I'm cruising along here, if I forget something, please do, jump in. Um, so anyway, yeah, that's why we say we're trying to solve that. Lost my presentation slide. There we go. Okay. So when we try to merge these, if we go back to that, sorry, just one last time, the thing I want to point out is, right, typically this is where they exist though, right? We typically have a project schedule, Microsoft Project probably being one of the most common ones, Microsoft Excel for our fee spreadsheet or our management, resource allocation spreadsheet. And so when we try to merge these, so I'm going to pick on Microsoft Project for a second. When we try to merge these, this is where the inefficiencies come from, right? Because in order to get these in one system that then I can kind of use to analyze, this is what it looks like. And this is true for multiple systems. I got to click into the scope menu. So I got to click into one particular task. Then I'm going to go to the resources tab. Then I'm going to click into the resources and select the resource that I want to use. Then I'm going to allocate that resource, and then I'm going to do that again for the next resource. And so if I have 3 resources or 5 resources, I'm going to do that over and over again. And then I'm going to go back and do it for the next task in the row. Well, as you can see, that is a lot of clicking. And not only is there a lot of clicking, there is a lot of context switching. When I talk about context switching, I mean, the screen is changing all the time and the information is changing on the screen all the time. And that's very inefficient. Psychology Today did a study and they say, we lose about 40% productivity whenever our contexts have to switch. I have a little video here that I'm not going to play right now just for sake of time, but the look on this fish's face, this is a funny reel and I wish I could play it, but in the reel, basically, the fish looks like it's lost. Well, if you've ever had that experience where you walk into a room, and you forget why you were there, and you're like, okay, what in the world did I walk into this room for? That's because your context switched, and that's literally what psychologists talk about. And so that's what's happening with tools like this, and that's what makes them more inefficient, because again, you're losing that context all the time. And this is true, this is true for almost every platform that I've experienced. So this is a screen of Deltek, and again, inside of Deltek, you're going to have to open up individual menus for individual resources, which is fundamentally why we go to the spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet is so easy. Even if you're using maybe a little bit more advanced tool like Smartsheet, which is a very good tool and has a little bit more efficiency, you're still going to navigate to a separate resource management area in which to allocate those individual resources, for a particular task on a project. So the cycle that you're going through, the process that you are using, is immensely inefficient because you're going through so many steps in order to get there. And Mark, I don't know if you want to chime in a little bit just on how that impacts your talent pool.
Well, it crushes their soul. Not to be dramatic, but this is a huge piece of inefficiency. And what we find is, your talent, your resources, they're not going to spend a lot of time trying to work through their program and trying to load it and get information out of it. They're going to go back to their spreadsheets, and they're going to go back to their Microsoft projects. And those may be easy tools to set up, but they just don't give you the information you need, and you've got to continue to go in and update them. And so that becomes a huge, sink of inefficiency.
Yep. Right. Well said. Yeah. And then when they exist in spreadsheets, that data, well, all somebody has to do is, copy the spreadsheet, turn it into the next file with their initials on it. And, soon you have 5 different versions, a dozen different versions of the spreadsheet out there, right? And you can't leverage that data for any predictive value. And that's the other part of this equation, the prediction side. So what we've done with InScope is we've tried to set it up, like that spreadsheet experience, so that the context, again, and that's the secret sauce, right, is the context isn't changing. So I have my scope of work listed vertically, and I have my resources organized horizontally. I can add in resources. I can add in rate tables. I can do everything I need to do for the fundamental basics of, what my company runs on in terms of their resources. And then all I have to do, whether I'm building a project plan or whether I'm updating, going back and updating a project plan, is I simply allocate the effort. The other thing about this, as you can see on this screen, is I can see all the other context, right? I can see everything else on the screen in terms of, well, how many hours did I put for the analyst to work on it? How many hours did I put for the senior engineer, right? So the context is never changing on me, which makes it more like that spreadsheet experience that most people prefer. And so when you have that context on the screen, it gives you the comprehension, right? And so now when you're looking at all your projects like this is illustrating, and you can set up reports like this in various systems. You can tie spreadsheets together, to give you this experience to where, okay, if I can see everything, I can see budget, I can see how much remains, I can see my schedule all together. And then in terms of, like, if I'm looking at percent completions, for example, as Mark's doing here in this illustration, he can sort by, okay, well, what's the scope of work completion compared to my schedule completion compared to my cost completion. I can see everything again in one screen. So when we basically, we want to end that context switching. So the comparison between the two, the process on the left, obviously much more strenuous, and much more harder to see everything, than the process on the right, which is, again, why people prefer the spreadsheet approach, as opposed to, those more tedious programs. And that's why, typically most people just won't go through that effort, because heaven forbid something have to change, and then you have to remember, okay, what menu do I go back to in order to see it? So we want, again, this is the information effort reduction side of it. We want 45%, or at least with InScope, based on our measurements, you get 45% fewer interactions, 40% less time searching, for information. So overall, 67% gain. What does that mean? What does that translate to in terms of hours and dollars? Well, if, for example, you spend 10% of your time a week on project management, or your project managers do, now you're looking at a savings of $134 a year at a nominal price of $150 per hour. That's $20,000 a year per project manager, right? So that you can realize some substantial savings. So the things you want to look for, again, regardless of what system you're looking at, things you want to look for: easy setup, right? These systems, I mean, I've implemented systems. I've been doing this, for several years now, for more for on the owner agency side, DOTs and public works departments and that sort of thing. But I'm shocked at how long some of these systems take to configure and implement. So InScope is not that way, and that was a real hallmark of what we wanted. You want easy setup, and then you want the updating, like we just talked about. You want the triangle creation to be very easy. You want easy comprehension. You want everything automated, when things should be automatically linked together. Because again, we're trying to get minimal effort to understand the triangle. That's where our efficiencies are picked up. That's where your talent pool, can get more of the activities that you want them to do, right? Satisfying clients, developing skills, developing new ideas, and at the end of the day, designing cool stuff, right? That's where you begin to reclaim. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the prediction side of it. Okay, let's talk about the talent utilization side. So we want to reclaim our talent productivity. You want to keep your talent doing what they love, and you want to avoid, late nights, burnout, those stressful time crunches. So you ask yourself, with your existing systems, well, do you know who's doing what and when? Can you account for everything that's asked? Can you equitably identify and reward your top and trusted performers? Do you have the data to support that? And most importantly, can you avoid burnout? And Mark, you came off mute there, so if you want to throw something in here.
Well, I was just going to segue into this slide, but yeah, keep going. You're
Oh,
you're right there. I'll jump in.
okay, no problem. Um, so in terms of workloads, when we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we best utilize, how do we plan out our talent? Because I guess the other thing that can happen too, that we could mention, right, is your talent becomes idle. I mean, that's the other piece of it, right? You're paying for this talent, and then because of just how schedules work out between clients or delays or whatever the case is, well, now maybe there's not as much work for them to do for a period of time. Well, again, if you have the prediction side of it, you can see that sort of that train coming, and you can begin to make decisions, and you can use that project management data, because you've made that iron triangle so easy to build. You can use that to get the best utilization out of your talent, right? So we do this, and the most typical tool is workloads. So in its simplest version, what we want to do with workloads is simply take a pivot of, hey, I got my projects and I got my scope of work breakdown, and I got my scheduled data, my starts and finishes, and I have, I'm spending, whoever my resources are spending various hours, that's that sort of fee spreadsheet structure. I want to take this and I want to turn it into this. I want to pivot it to basically say, okay, well, here's my resource, here's all the projects that they're working on, the task, and here's the hours within the time frame that they have to do it. The only trick to this, or one of the tricks to this, is that when you do this, you don't automatically want to use the project schedule is the only thing I'll point out. So again, whether you're doing this in spreadsheets or not, you don't want to automatically use the project schedule because what's going to happen? Well, you have some tasks in terms of scheduling that are in the past. You have, let me go back to that for a second. You have some that are in the future, and you have some that are in the present, basically, are spanning both. Well, when you forecast, or excuse me, when you look at workloads, you always want work can't happen in the past. And so you always want to um, look at your workloads in terms of today forward. And so whenever you're doing this, even if you're using a spreadsheet tool, you want to make sure that you are you are basically predicting from today forward. And then in the past, with the past, at least what I recommend is we'll just load up your workload hours, whatever hours remain on that last day of a scheduled task, because that will do two things. That will either say, okay, I got money, I got hours left and I'm not going to use them. So therefore I can reduce the amount, and or I need to change that schedule. So it's going to do one of those two things. Now, I'll make this spreadsheet available to everybody on the call. You're welcome to use this. Has actually little instructions in it, but this is the approach the spreadsheet takes. If you just load up your projects and your tasks and your schedules, and I have little helper columns in here to do that little piece that I was just illustrating in terms of the workload control date. And basically what it does, this is all dynamically linked into various tables, and it basically slices your resource allocations into individual rows for allocations and then individual rows for each month. And it allows you to turn it into a pivot table. So if you just add your data into this, you can actually get to this workloads table very simply. So again, if you want a copy of this, you're welcome to it, and we're making it available. And I also want to spend a little bit of time in our last few minutes showing you, how InScope works. So the way InScope works is that InScope uses what's called forecasts. So if you think of your budget, that's your fee with your client. And then as you actually start expending, you charge time. And let's say I had 100 hours, and I charge 50 hours. That's my actual. I've charged 50 hours. That means I have 50 hours remaining in my budget, 50 hours remaining on that particular piece of scope or stage or whatever the case is with your client. Well, just because you have 50 hours remaining, it may or may not take you 50 hours to complete the work, right? It might be above or below that remaining 50 hours. So what you want is you want your forecast, and you want a tool that allows you to forecast differently than just what remains. It gives you that flexibility. And that's the way InScope works, because ideally you don't want this situation where what's forecast is more than what remains, although that's often the case. You hopefully are going to have this situation where what remains is greater than your forecast, and then you can just zero it out. And Mark, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this because, you're using this actively in your business.
Yeah, so the workload is all based on the schedules for all of your projects and the forecast of all of your projects. So just like Kevin was saying, if you're moving through your projects, you've got 50 hours remaining, but you've completed that task and you've moved on to the next task, you can go into your forecast and remove 50 hours, and that way it's not in workload now. The same thing happens on the other side. You're in there, you've depleted your budget, and you say, I've still got 100 hours remaining. You put that in your forecast, and that will go into your workload. So it's just a very easy way as you're moving through a project to balance out your workloads, project by project. These tasks are done, they're closed. We no longer need hours in there, or hey, we've got more hours or additional tasks that we're trying to complete, and we can put those in there and accurately forecast the man-hour requirements.
Yeah, great. I'm just going to skip. This is the picture then of that translation into the workload screen. So the forecasting that's happening on this screen basically translates directly into the forecast screen. And again, you can see some of those highlighted. Well, that's those hours that are left in the past that, again, schedules may need to be adjusted or forecasts may need to be zeroed out. So the bottom line is, and the punchline is, your talent utilization, if you can make the work, planning the work, controlling the work, updating the work really fast and easy, then it means less effort spent elsewhere, means more effort goes into winning and doing the work, which is really what you want. So this was the bottom line. These were, just a recap of the learning objectives that we covered. But in our few minutes left, you all can obviously see this on the screen. Slides will be available for you as well as that spreadsheet that I mentioned. But I'd love to, I know we only got a few minutes left. I want to make sure I honor our time and leave it for any few questions in the end here.
Well,
All right, I'll ask a question. Where do you put in current, or how do you input current time spent on a project? In other words, make all these we have budgets set up.
Great
When
question.
and where is the actual time spent to date? How's that integrate into this whole thing?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark. You can.
I was just going to say, so that is, in InScope, it's timesheets. So we go in, and as everybody's entering their timesheet hours, it's automatically applying to the project. And the same with expenses and subconsultants. So just as you're moving through, you get a subconsultant's invoice, you apply it in subs, it automatically deducts from the budget, and the timesheet hours automatically deduct from the workload projection. So as you're moving through day in and day out, it's always giving you an actual budget, and remaining sort of as you're moving through, and it's just linking timesheets to that.
Which is a really important piece of it too, is that, and again, that goes back to that automated linking that you want to happen as soon as timesheet hours are entered. It's not after accounting, post process, prods, peels, whatever they do. Like once the timesheet goes in, those hours are immediately deducted, both from your budget and from your forecast. So even if you forecast higher or lower, it's still going to adjust based on the timesheet entries automatically. And then I had another piece of that, but I forgot what I was going to say. So,
okay. So the timesheets are part of this system, or are they?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So
yep.
So can you generate invoices from the system as well? Or no?
Yeah, what we do is we typically generate the invoice backup, because most likely,
Okay.
your invoicing is going to be handled. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
basically so it's not an accounting system. And so, we would integrate with the accounting system, but this is more of a, how are you actually doing and progressing through your project? So it's a tool for the PMs.
Understood.
And so at the end of each month, I can tell you what I do is I print out the invoice backup reports, and then that goes to the accounting, and they create invoices off of it, and then it cycles through the PMs. But it's the biggest thing is just having everything connected so that you can see where you are at all your projects all the time. And just having that amount of information is really helpful. And then, of course, having the workload projection without doing anything really. I can look and see what my workload 3 months from now, and that's just having that information at your fingertips is really nice.
yeah, for sure. Oh, and I remember the other thing I was going to say too on the timesheets. It also reverses, right? I mean, if for whatever reason, hey, too many hours got charged, or you charged the wrong billing code or whatever, as soon as you go back and edit that timesheet and make those adjustments, the adjustments are immediately reversed on your project plan as well, which is super nice. It doesn't take an act of Congress, to go back and fix something that, was maybe a mistake on timesheet entries. Great question though, Paul. Appreciate it. All right. Well, if anybody has any more, I'm happy to stay for a few extra minutes, but I want to honor people's time as well.
I'm done. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I did the obligatory 30-second pause. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and hopefully see you in the next one.
Okay.
Right.
Stop.